If you have your Bibles, I invite you to turn with me to 2 Kings chapter 22, verses 1 through 7. Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jedidah, daughter of Adiah of Bozkath. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord and walked in all the way of his father David. He did not turn aside to the right or to the left. In the 18th year of King Josiah, the king sent Shaphan, son of Azaliah, son of Meshullam, the secretary, to the house of the Lord, saying, "Go up to the high priest Hilkiah, and have him count the entire sum of the money that has been brought into the house of the Lord, which the keepers of the threshold have collected from the people. Let it be given into the hand of the workers who have the oversight of the house of the Lord. Let them give it to the workers who are at the house of the Lord repairing the house, that is, to the carpenters, to the builders, to the masons, and let them use it to buy timber and stone to repair the house. But no accounting shall be asked from them for the money that is delivered into their hand, for they deal honestly." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Morning, everyone. For those of you who I haven't had the privilege of meeting yet, my name is Tyler Christiansen. I'm the new pastor here at Grace, and it is an honor to be with you this morning, and thanks for tuning in for worship. You'll find out more about me and my family in the coming weeks, and I hope that some of you, as Stephen told you, will be able to come out and join us for s'mores this week. I will be eating plenty of s'mores over the next 3 nights, weather pending, of course, and then the next week, my wife Eleanor is going to join me for those dates as well, so we hope that you and your family will be able to sign up for one of those. Come out, have a little hors d'oeuvre, perhaps, or maybe a little dessert after dinner. But we'll plan to sit by the fire, get to know each other a little bit, have some snacks, and we're excited about that. Another thing that you'll learn about me is that you'll probably see me driving to and fro from church from time to time, and I'm going to be driving my 16-year-old truck. It's done really well for our family. It's schlepped kids to school and back many a days and served us well, and it's been very reliable for me, and right now I still enjoy driving it. But something I noticed last weekend, see, I got out on the highway, and we were driving up to the northern part of the state to visit my in-laws, and as we were out on the freeway, I noticed when I got up to some higher speeds that the car began to drift a little bit. You know how that is sometimes when you're holding onto the wheel and you loosen your grip just a little bit and it veers out of the lane to either the left or the right. My car started drifting to the right, and I recognized that as I loosened my grip, it wouldn't take long. If I let go of the wheel for about 2 seconds, I'd probably be over on the shoulder. It was a pretty strong pull. After that, I realized that if I'd wait even longer than that, I'd probably be in the ditch and things could go bad quickly. And I recognized that thing that I had experienced in other vehicles before, the car had somehow gotten itself out of alignment. Now, I want to come back to that in just a little bit, but first let's review some of what Dixie just taught us. We heard the story about King Josiah. We don't know a whole lot about King Josiah. In fact, there's only really one chapter devoted to him in the book of 2 Kings, and then we hear about him again in 2 Chronicles, and it's more or less the same story told just a little bit differently depending on where we're reading in the Old Testament. King Josiah was an interesting person because we hear in the story that Dixie just read to us that he was 8 years old when he became king. Now, he was king of the southern kingdom. You remember this is the time in the history of the Hebrew people where there's a northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And Josiah was the king of the southern kingdom for a short period of time. So 8 years old, which means that something bad had to have happened for him to take the throne at age 8. And that's exactly what did happen. You see, his father was murdered a short time into his kingship, and he was regarded to be one of the most wicked kings in all of Judah's history. Things weren't much better a generation before that when Josiah's grandfather was the king. Also, he behaved rather wickedly, we are told. And you have to go back to Josiah's great-grandfather before you'd find a king that was really one where history holds him to be someone who actually made some positive decisions. And he even so faltered at times. So Josiah didn't have a lot of role models. He didn't have a lot of experience in the family to look up to and someone to say, here's who I'm going to model my leadership after. So he's 8 years old, and so we have to imagine that there were some advisors that he surrounded himself with, helped coach him up and taught him how to be a king, helped him be a leader. And for whatever reason, we don't exactly know all the details, but they have embarked on a large building project at the time. So it's now 10 or 12 years later. Josiah is now probably about 20 years old, and there's this building program going on, and it's time to pay all of the laborers, particularly the masons. And so Josiah says to some of his court officials, hey, go into the treasury, go find enough money to pay all of the laborers, and let's pay up. It's time to settle our accounts. So they go looking in the treasury, and they go sifting through all of the resources, and in there they discover something that somehow inexplicably has become lost for years, generations even. They uncover the book of the law, or the law that was given to Moses. Now, what's so hard to believe about all of this, what's so unimaginable, is that this was the same book of the law, or the tablets, that had traveled with the Hebrew people through Sinai, through the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, brought into the promised land. This was the thing that they traveled with them, with the ark. It's hard to believe that something that was that precious to that group of people would have ever been misplaced. But somehow, for whatever reason, it ends up in the treasury, gets buried underneath a pile of rubble, much like what would happen if we were to go into our attics or in the back recesses of our garages today, right? And they uncover this precious thing. And they must have said to themselves, hey, we got to take this back to Josiah. He needs to see this. And that's exactly what they do. So they take it back and they said, yeah, we found the money that we needed to pay the masons, but we also found this. It's something you need to see. Josiah recognizes what it is as he starts to read through this. And all of a sudden he says, we need to implement these laws again. And at that point he recognizes just how far off track the people have gotten. They have, in the period between the last time that they upheld the law until that day, gotten so far off course that Josiah calls for massive reforms to take place among the people. In other words, they had become misaligned and needed to be corrected again, to be brought back on course. Now, the funny thing about this story is that it wasn't just any old day that they recognized that they had become misaligned as a people. See, there's a lot going on in the background of this story that if you were just to pick up and start reading from the 22nd chapter, you wouldn't necessarily recognize. You'd have to go back and realize what's going on in the broader context of the culture at the time. You see, Josiah was king when all of the surrounding nations that surrounded their tiny kingdom of Judah found that all of their neighbors were at war or gearing up for war. And mind you, we're not talking about just small tribes of people who are fighting with one another. We're talking about massive empires like the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Egyptians. These were the people around them who were fighting with each other or preparing to take hold and trying to dominate the leadership and to take over the other surrounding kingdoms. And so Judah found itself not only in the crossroads of all of these currents of socio-political action and warfare, but also in the crosshairs of what was going on. And so it was during this time when Josiah takes leadership and takes the kingship that they uncover the law. And so it's instrumental then that the law is brought back into place and help get things back into alignment and things going again. Now, I use that word alignment again like my vehicle because what I didn't realize as I was making my regular commute to and from the office and back home again, going about 30 miles an hour, maybe 40 down the road, I didn't realize that my car was misaligned. But it took traveling out on the interstate and going about 70 before I recognized just how far misaligned my vehicle had become. And I guess what I'd like you to remember in this is that I think that this is a metaphor for us as well. You know, sometimes we only realize that we are misaligned when we're traveling at high speeds and life is coming at us quickly. I think only when Josiah saw the law and recognized the conflicts of the world around him and realized just how delicate his situation was, that he saw how misaligned the kingdom of Judah had become. This is true in our lives as well. Sometimes it takes something that really shakes us to our core. It really grabs hold of us and causes us to recognize that things are not as they should be before we want to find the correct course again. We struggle because on the surface, through the day-to-day going on of our lives, we think things are just fine. We think things are manageable. We think we've got them under control. And then something causes us to realize that things are not as they should be. We are misaligned, need to be brought back on course again. And this is at least what I have experienced so much of this spring and early on this summer. And I know that some of you are feeling this way because I've already heard some of you speak this way. But the challenge for so many of us living in a time of pandemic is that we realize that we are amidst this time of tremendous change, this change that has been forced upon us, and we are struggling with how to deal with it. And we realize in many of our cases that we may be just a bit misaligned, or maybe significantly misaligned for this change that is at hand. And I'll tell you a little bit what I mean by that. You see, I realized early on in this pandemic that I had become very misaligned because I had become very accustomed to the regular way of going about my life. I had realized how often I had taken for granted some of the things that now I cherish all the more, because this kind of opportunity, if we want to call it that, has called me to task, and it may have for you too. For example, I look at my family life, and I think about just how much these people mean to me. And sure, if you would have talked to me in January or February or early March, of course I would have told you that my family means the world to me. That's absolutely important. But it's not the same as I see them now, having spent every day with them and living under the same roof with them and keeping the kids home from school and working from home. I see them differently. I also see some of my personal space time a little bit differently too, as I'm sure resonates with many of you. But these are things that we took for granted before. We got into our own habits, we got into our own rhythms, and maybe we had drifted a little bit apart and become misaligned. And this has brought us back on a corrective course again. Or maybe I think about things that I had taken for granted before, like my access to medical care, the fact that I have been able to maintain health insurance throughout this whole thing, the fact that I have never wondered before a pandemic about whether or not a loved one got sick if there would be space in a hospital for them, or in an emergency department, or in an ICU. Those are things that are easy to take for granted when we live in communities and cultures such as the one that many of us find ourselves in. I never wondered about whether or not there'd be food if I went to the grocery store, or whether we'd have enough meat to supply our family. We happen to have a freezer and a deep freezer. We're able to stock up. And I'm thankful for that. I don't want to take that for granted. I don't want to live as though I had before. I want to be grateful for the opportunities that I have and the people that I have in my life. Never been so grateful for friends, for the opportunity to talk to somebody on the phone or to meet somebody, to hang out in the driveway and visit 6 feet away. Those people who it was always easy to say, hey, just stop by on your way home from work, or let's get our families together on Saturday night. That was always just so easy to do and take for granted. Not so much anymore. So I want to be corrected in that. I want to get back aligned where I need to be. But I also want to be aligned in terms of how my reality has not always been the reality for everyone else. I recognize that there are a lot of families who have not been able to maintain employment throughout this. I recognize that there are a lot of families who have fallen into a crisis situation when it came to a situation of whether I am able to keep my kids home from school or whether they stay in the car while I go into my place of business to do my job. I recognize that people who haven't had the same luxuries that I have to be able to have flexibilities to maybe work from home have had to make very difficult decisions. I recognize that there are some people who, because of their inability to have access to good health care, have been dealing with the things that I've been thinking about during a pandemic before the pandemic, and maybe afterward too. I recognize that food insecurity is not just a matter of whether or not there will be enough beef at the grocery store, but that many people are struggling with this and have been for years. See, I knew these things were real, but there's something about being in this moment of change that we all find ourselves in now that has caused me to have a new awakening, or perhaps a realignment to the social injustices that we see around us all the time. And so as I'm thinking about all of these things, I go back to so much of what Jesus taught. How he was talking about, yes, you need to have your own alignment in terms of your own personal faith, your personal holiness, your ability to be a disciple, to be a kingdom builder, but you also need to be concerned about the welfare of others, about injustices that you see in the world, and you need to speak out against them, and you need to serve others who are in need of a hand up. So this realignment isn't just about not taking things for granted anymore, but it's also in terms of trying to see the world differently, maybe as others do, and an opportunity for all of us to grow in this. Now, I'm not saying that this pandemic is something that has been a wake-up call from God for all of us. I don't believe that God sends viruses into the world. But what I do think is that God is always at work and using opportunities to teach, to help us learn, to show us something new, to create new hearts within us. And maybe this is a moment just like that. Maybe this is an opportunity to be realigned, to find center again, to be recalibrated, if you will. And that's a good thing. That's something that we can take advantage of. That's something that we can learn from and that we can grow from. So when I think about this realignment, it causes me to consider some of the things that I've been thinking about now since the beginning of the pandemic. Because one thing that I have thought many times over, and I know you have too, is I really hope that we can get things back to the way that they were. And while I think what I mean by that is, I'm desperate to be in worship together with the whole assembly of people together. I'm looking forward to giving hugs again. I'm looking forward to giving high fives and handshakes. I'm looking forward to eating at my favorite restaurants. I'm looking forward to seeing family members that I haven't been able to see because they haven't been able to travel by airplane safely. I'm looking forward to meeting so many of you, and I'm looking forward to meeting you with masks off. I'm looking forward to so much about going back to a society that is free of coronavirus. And yet, there's a part of me that doesn't want to go back to the way that I was. Yes, I want things to go back to the way that they were, but I want to be a different person on the other side of this. I want to be a changed person. I want to be someone who doesn't take things like family and relationships and food and employment and insurance and my health for granted anymore because I assume it's just going to be like that again tomorrow like it was yesterday. I want to be a changed person after this, and I'm guessing that you do too. You want to grow from this. You want to be strengthened by this. And God willing, we will emerge from this as healthy, strong people again. But we do this as reformed people, as recalibrated, realigned once again, on the course that God has set for us. Sometimes, for better or worse, it takes the moments when life is coming at us fast, those high-speed moments to recognize that we have become misaligned. But through the grace of Jesus Christ, we always have the opportunity to be reformed, to be created anew, to realign once again with what it is that God has created us and called us to be. I invite you to begin to think about things in those terms, to embrace the change and the opportunity for change that is before us now, so that we can emerge on the other side of this, changed, renewed, realigned.